She had a list. That was the first thing Sebastian Delacourt noticed. Not her mended cloak, not the rain still damp on her collar, but the folded paper she placed on the solicitor's desk with the calm precision of a woman who had rehearsed this moment and decided, somewhere between the street door and this room, that she would not be made to wait. The Duke of Cravenmoor had come to Lincoln's Inn Fields on a gray November afternoon to issue a simple instruction, and instead he found himself looking across a mahogany desk at a woman whose dark eyes held no apology, and whose hands, he observed, were completely still. Outside, rain tapped steadily against the window glass. Inside, the fire had burned low, and the cold in the room was the particular cold of a place where important things are said without warmth. Sebastian had said many important things in cold rooms. He had not yet said them to anyone quite like this. He had told his solicitor, Mr. Fenton, to find him a bride who would ask for nothing. The instruction had been clear, the reasoning private, and the timeline pressing. 6 weeks remained before his late father's will revoked Sebastian's guardianship of his 2 young half-siblings and transferred it, by default, to his cousin, Verity Delacourt. Sebastian did not want to be a guardian. He had been avoiding the fact of those children for 11 months. But he wanted Roland to have them considerably less, and so he had come to Lincoln's Inn Fields on a Tuesday afternoon to arrange a marriage with the efficiency of a man arranging the renewal of a lease. The door had opened before Fenton could answer. "Miss Verity Landon," the woman said, addressing both of them without hesitation. "Of Thistlewick. I have come about the arrangement." Fenton looked at Sebastian. Sebastian looked at the woman. She had already set her list on the desk. "You have come about the arrangement," Sebastian repeated. "I heard of it through Mrs. Alcott's housekeeper," Verity said. "I understand the terms. No affection required, no interference in the nursery, no questions of any kind. I have read them, and I have terms of my own." She nodded toward the paper. "They are brief." Sebastian picked up the list. It was, as she said, brief. 3 items, written in a clear, unhurried hand. The first, housing secured for Grace Landon, aged 15, and Peter Landon, aged 8, within the household, with a private arrangement for Grace's continued education. The second, access to a still room at the estate for the purpose of compounding remedies and maintaining a working dispensary. The third, and here Sebastian read more slowly, a formal petition, submitted under the Duke of Cravenmoor's name, to the relevant magistrate's office, requesting the reopening of the criminal case against Josiah Landon, convicted apothecary, transported 18 months prior. Sebastian set the paper down. "Step out, Fenton," he said. The solicitor gathered his coat and left without a word, pulling the door to behind him. The fire crackled once. Rain continued against the glass. "You understand," Sebastian said, "that the third item is not a household matter." "I understand that perfectly," Verity replied. "That is why I put it on the list rather than raising it afterward. A petition under my name to reopen a criminal conviction is a public act. It attaches my name to a disgraced apothecary's case." "Your name," Verity said, "is what you are offering in exchange for a wife who will ask nothing of you. I am asking. That is the arrangement, as I understand it." Sebastian studied her. She was perhaps 28 or 29, with the kind of composure that is not born but made, assembled piece by piece from necessity. Her cloak had been mended at the left cuff with a slightly different thread. Her boots were clean, but worn at the heel. She did not look at the fire, at the desk, or at the door through which Fenton had departed. She looked at Sebastian. "You could have come here and said nothing," he said. agreed to the terms as written, and raised the petition question later. I could have, Verity agreed. I chose not to. Why? Because I do not negotiate from concealment, she said. If you are going to refuse, I would prefer to know before I move 2 children across the county. Sebastian looked at the list again. Housing for the children, straightforward, reasonable. The still room, an unusual request, but not an inconvenient one. The petition, that was the item that had weight. He turned it over in his mind, looking for the procedural objection, the administrative reason to decline, the clause that made it impossible. He did not find one. The first 2 items, he said, I will not contest. And the third? I will not contest it either, Sebastian said, and was mildly surprised to hear himself say so. But I will require the petition to be reviewed by Fentham before submission. Reviewed, not delayed, Verity said. Reviewed. If the grounds are legally sound, it proceeds. Verity considered this for a moment. Agreed, she said. Sebastian reached for the pen on the desk. Verity reached for it at the same moment, and their hands met over the inkwell. Her fingers against the back of his, neither of them expecting the contact. Sebastian did not move his hand immediately. Neither did she. The pen sat between them. Your Grace, Verity said, her voice entirely level. Miss Landon, Sebastian replied. She took the pen. She signed first, in the same clear, unhurried hand as the list. Sebastian signed beneath her name, and the preliminary agreement was done. The marriage was performed by special license 4 days later, in a cold church off Fleet Street, with Fentham and a church warden as witnesses. Grace cried quietly into her handkerchief, and Peter stood very straight in a coat that was slightly too large for him. Watching the proceedings with the focused attention of a child determined to understand what he was witnessing. Verity wore her best dress, which was gray wool with a cream collar, and she did not tremble when she spoke her vows, though Sebastian noticed that she held Grace's hand for a moment after the register was signed before releasing it. They arrived at Cravenmoor Hall on a Thursday afternoon. Verity with 2 trunks and her father's compounding ledger tucked under her arm, as though she intended to begin work before the carriage had fully stopped. The hall was a large, handsome house in the Palladian style, set back from a long gravel drive and surrounded by grounds that had been maintained but not loved. Sebastian showed them the principal rooms with the efficiency of a man conducting a tour he had not planned, and then retreated to his study. And that was the end of the welcome. It was Grace who found the nursery wing. She came to Verity that evening with a particular expression, not frightened, but careful, and reported that the corridor at the east end of the 2nd floor had curtains drawn on every window and sheets over every piece of furniture, and that when she had asked the housekeeper, Mrs. Trent, about it, the woman had said only that His Grace preferred it so. Verity went to see for herself. The wing was exactly as Grace had described, silent in the way that rooms become silent when no one has spoken in them for a long time. She counted 4 rooms, a schoolroom, a day nursery, a night nursery, and a small sitting room that had been arranged for a child's use. The sheets were thick with dust. The curtains were heavy wool, and when Verity drew one back an inch, the late afternoon light came through the gap like something that had been waiting to be let in. Mrs. Trent appeared at the corridor's entrance. Your Grace, the housekeeper said, with the careful tone of a woman who had learned to deliver information without offering opinion. His Grace has not, that is, this wing has been. I understand, Verity said. Begin opening it this afternoon. Start with the schoolroom. remove the sheets, open the curtains, and have the fires laid. She paused. All 4 rooms, Mrs. Trent, by this evening. His Grace has not given instruction. I am giving instruction, Verity said without heat. The schoolroom first, please. She did not go to Sebastian to ask permission. She went to find Peter, who had already located the kitchen garden and was attempting to conduct a thorough inventory of its contents. Within a fortnight, Verity had established a routine that Sebastian had not anticipated and could not, once it was in place, easily dismantle. The 4 children, his half-sister Eliza, aged 9, and his half-brother Thomas, aged 7, alongside Grace and Peter, were gathered into shared lessons each morning in the now-opened schoolroom, with Grace serving as an able assistant to the tutor Verity had engaged from the village. They took their midday meal together in the small dining room adjacent to the nursery, a fact that Sebastian discovered on a Tuesday when he walked past the corridor and heard through the closed door a considerable argument about whether a thrush or a finch was the more interesting bird. He stopped outside the door. He did not go in. He stood there for perhaps 2 minutes, listening to Peter's absolute conviction that the thrush was superior on grounds of volume. And then he continued to his study. He returned the following morning, and the morning after that. He was there at the schoolroom door when Roland Delacourt arrived for the first of his visits. Roland came in a well-appointed carriage and presented himself to Mrs. Trent as a cousin, calling to pay his respects to the new Duchess. He was 31, with an easy manner and the particular social fluency of a man who had spent his life ensuring that people found him agreeable. He brought a small gift for the children, a box of sugared almonds, and complimented Verity on the improvements to the nursery wing with an expression of warm approval that Sebastian, watching from across the drawing room, recognized as entirely constructed. I am so pleased to see the hall lively again, Roland said to the assembled company. 3 neighboring families had called that same afternoon, and the drawing room was moderately full. My cousin has been too long alone here. It does a house good to have a family in it. He turned to Verity with an expression of kind interest. And you are from Thistlewick, I understand, Your Grace. A small place, but not without its history. Your father kept the apothecary there, did he not? Before the... Roland paused, with the timing of a man who had practiced the pause. Difficulties. The room shifted. 2 of the hostesses exchanged a glance. Verity stood quite still. My father, Verity said, kept the most respected dispensary in 3 counties for 22 years. Of course, Roland said pleasantly. It was a great pity about the magistrate's findings. The adulterated medicines. I understand 2 people were taken ill, one quite seriously. These things do leave a mark on a family, I'm afraid, however blameless the children may be. He was addressing the room as much as Verity. Sebastian could see that clearly. He crossed the drawing room in 12 steps and came to stand at Verity's side. Not between her and Roland, but beside her. Close enough that Roland, to continue speaking, would have to address them both. Roland looked at Sebastian for a moment. Then he smiled and changed the subject. The damage, however, was visible. 2 of the hostesses found reasons to end their calls shortly afterward, and one of them did not meet Verity's eyes when she took her leave. In the carriage home, a short drive, as the call had been at a neighboring estate, Sebastian told her what he knew. Roland will continue his visits, Sebastian said. You should expect it. Verity looked at the passing hedgerows. Why have you not cut him off? Sebastian did not answer immediately. Outside, the November countryside moved past the carriage window, bare and gray. It is a complicated matter, he said at last. I see, Verity said, and said nothing further. But the quality of her silence was not the silence of a woman who accepted incomplete answers. It was the silence of a woman who was filing the question away for a more suitable moment. Sebastian began arriving at the still room early in the mornings, on the stated grounds that certain household accounts were kept there. This was true. Verity had organized the dispensary records alongside the household inventory in a way that made a kind of logical sense. But it was not, Sebastian was aware, the reason he came. The still room was warm and smelled of dried lavender and something sharper, chemical and clean. Verity worked at the central bench with the focused economy of someone who had been doing this since childhood. Her father's compounding ledger opened beside her. A row of small brass weights arranged in order of denomination on the left side of the scale. Peter, when he was not at lessons, was permitted to sit on a low stool and watch. And on the mornings when he was present, Verity taught him the weights by name and denomination. "This one," she said on a Tuesday morning, placing a small weight in Peter's palm, "is a scruple. 20 grains. Can you tell me which is heavier, this or the drachm?" Peter squinted at the scales with the expression of a child engaged in genuine intellectual effort. He placed the scruple on the left pan. He reached for the drachm. "The angle of your wrist," Sebastian said from the doorway. Both Verity and Peter looked up. Sebastian walked to the bench. He leaned over Peter's shoulder and placed his hand over the boy's, adjusting the angle at which he held the small weight before setting it on the pan. His hand covered Verity's in the process. She had moved to steady the scale at the same moment. And for a beat, neither of them moved, his fingers over hers on the cool brass rim. The correction, when Sebastian stepped back, had taken considerably longer than it needed to. "Drachm is heavier," Peter announced, watching the scale settle. "It is," Verity agreed. Her voice was entirely steady. That evening, at the county assembly in the market town, two of the hostesses who had been present at the drawing room gathering refused to acknowledge Verity when she was introduced. The first looked through her as though she had not spoken. The second turned to address her companion with the practiced ease of a woman who has spent years perfecting the social cut. Verity stood through both of them without any change in her expression. In the carriage home, she waited until the lights of the assembly rooms had disappeared behind a bend in the road. And then she asked her question. "You stood beside me in the drawing room when Roland spoke," she said. "You will stand beside me at the next gathering and the one after that. I understand the gesture, and I am not ungrateful for it." She turned to look at him directly. "But Roland is not firing one round, Sebastian. He is running a campaign. He will not stop until my father's name is destroyed beyond recovery, or until something stops him. I need to know whether you intend to do something to stop him, or whether you intend to stand beside me indefinitely while he does the damage." Sebastian looked at her. In the dark of the carriage, with the road noise around them, she was very clear-eyed and very direct. He did not answer that night. Peter's fever came on a Friday and was violent from the first hour. By Saturday morning, it had reached a height that the local physician, Dr. Marsh, found troubling. By Sunday, it had not broken, and Dr. Marsh's expression had acquired the particular quality of a man who has reached the edge of his competence. Roland arrived on Monday morning with his own physician, a Dr. Carew from the city, introduced as a man of considerable experience with fevers of this kind. He presented the visit as family concern, expressed with the warmth of a cousin who wished only to be helpful. And Dr. Carew examined Peter with professional thoroughness and produced a course of treatment. Verity read the proposed dosage. She read it twice. Then she looked at Peter, 8 years old, small for his age, 42 pounds by her most recent estimate, and looked at the dosage again, and something went very cold and very clear in her mind. "This quantity of antimony compound," she said to Dr. Carew, with the careful precision of someone who has decided not to raise her voice, "for a child of this weight and age, will not treat the fever. It will cause a secondary crisis that his body cannot manage." Dr. Carew looked at her with the patient tolerance of a man who has been questioned by women before and has a reliable method for ending the conversation. "Your Grace, I appreciate your concern, but the dosage is standard for an adult of 12 stone, Verity said. "My father's ledger specifies the adjustment by weight and age. I have the ledger in this house. I will show you the calculation if you require it. But you will not administer this treatment to this child." "Madam, I am the physician, and I am removing you from this sick room," Verity said. "Please go." Dr. Carew looked at Roland, who stood in the doorway. Roland's expression was briefly, precisely readable, not surprise but calculation. He had not expected her to catch it. "I think," Roland said pleasantly, "that perhaps Dr. Carew might wait downstairs while the matter is discussed." "There is nothing to discuss," Verity said. "Dr. Carew will wait downstairs, and then he will leave. Good morning." Dr. Carew left. Roland, after a moment's pause, followed him. That night, Verity found Sebastian already in the sick room. He was seated in the chair beside Peter's bed, his coat removed and his sleeves rolled to the elbow, and he was reading, or attempting to read, from a small book of natural history that he had apparently found on the schoolroom shelf. Peter was asleep, his breathing labored but regular. The lamp on the bedside table burned low. Verity stopped in the doorway. Sebastian looked up. She came into the room and stood at the foot of the bed, looking at the boy's face, then at Sebastian. "This is the first time you have entered this wing," she said. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact, made in the same tone she used for dosage calculations. Sebastian said quietly, "Yes. You have been in this house with Eliza and Thomas for 11 months, Verity said. "They have eaten their meals without you. They have had their lessons without you. They have been ill, I am told, on 2 separate occasions. And you sent Mrs. Trent." She kept her voice quiet because Peter was sleeping. "Why can you sit with a boy who shares none of your blood tonight and could not cross this corridor for your own sister and brother for nearly a year?" Sebastian was quiet for a long moment. The lamp flame moved in some current of air. "Because I did not know them yet," he said at last. "Eliza and Thomas. I did not let myself know them. If I do not know them, if I remain only a name on a deed, a figure they see at Sunday dinner and nowhere else, then if something happens to them, it is—" He stopped. He tried again. "My wife died in this house, in a room 40 feet from where we are sitting. She was 26 years old, and she was in perfect health, and then she was not, and there was nothing I could do." He looked at Peter's face. "I thought that if I did not let myself care properly, the risk would be smaller, that the loss, if it came, would be something I could survive." Verity looked at him for a long moment. "Smaller risk," she said, "is not something children can live on." She said nothing more. She drew the second chair to the other side of the bed and sat down, and they kept watch over Peter in silence, the lamp between them. On the third night, as the gray beginning of dawn began to show at the window's edge, Peter's breathing changed, the labored quality easing, the intervals lengthening into something that was simply sleep. Verity, who had been awake since midnight, felt it before she heard it. Some tension in the room releasing like a held note finally resolved. Sebastian's hand found hers across the bed. Neither of them moved until Dr. Marsh arrived at first light. Roland moved quickly after the sick room. Within a fortnight, word had reached two of the county's principal families that the Duke of Cravenmoor's marriage was a matter of convenience, arranged to shelter a convicted man's daughter from the full consequence of her father's disgrace. The story was told with sympathy. Roland was careful to present himself as a concerned relation, pained to speak of it. And it spread through the county assembly circuit with the efficiency of information that people find both scandalous and satisfying. Verity was publicly cut at the Hargreave Assembly. She stood through it with her spine straight and her hands loose at her sides, and she said nothing. Sebastian, that same week, found himself in his father's study, working through a correspondence chest he had not opened since the estate was settled. He was looking, without quite admitting to himself that he was looking, for anything connected to Roland's business interests in the years before Josiah Landon's conviction. He found it on a Wednesday evening in a bundle of letters dated 2 years before the trial. It was a shipping manifest, handwritten, detailing a smuggling operation that had run goods through an apothecary's premises in Thistlewick. The apothecary was not named in the manifest. The man who organized the operation was Roland Delacourt. Sebastian sat with the document for a full evening. He read it 3 times. He set it on the desk and walked to the window and stood looking out at the grounds, which were dark. And then he walked back to the desk and read it again. In the morning, he sent for Fenton. The solicitor arrived by afternoon and read the manifest without expression. "If this is submitted as evidence in a petition to reopen the Landon case," Fenton said, "it will name your cousin as the party who provided false ledger evidence to the original magistrate. It will implicate the Cravenmoor name in the circumstances of the conviction, however indirectly, and it will be a matter of public record at the assizes." "I understand that," Sebastian said. "The county families who are already disposed against her grace will have another point of discussion," Fenton said. "The connection between your father's correspondence and the smuggling operation will be noted." "I understand that as well," Sebastian said. Fenton waited. Sebastian did not dismiss him immediately. He looked at the manifest on the desk, and he thought about Verity sitting across a sickbed in the dark. And he thought about his own voice saying the risk would be smaller, and her voice saying smaller risk is not something children can live on. "I will need to think further," Sebastian said. "Do not go far." Roland did not wait for Sebastian to reach a decision. Grace came to the still room on a Thursday morning with the particular walk of someone carrying something heavier than they should have to carry at 17. She held a folded document in both hands, and when she placed it on the workbench, her fingers were trembling. Verity read it. It was a summons. Grace Landon was required to appear at the spring assizes as a witness in a matter of fraud. Specifically, a charge that Verity Landon, Duchess of Cravenmoor, had used the Duke's name and influence to extort a false confession from a witness in the original Josiah Landon criminal case. Verity set the document on the workbench. She stood looking at it for a moment. Then she picked it up and went to find Sebastian. He was in the library. She placed the summons in front of him and waited while he read it. "Grace is 17, Verity said. She has never been in a courtroom. She has never been accused of anything. Roland has named her as a witness because he knows that I will not ask her to stand in that gallery and be made into a weapon against her own family." She watched Sebastian's face. "I need to know, before tomorrow, whether you intend to submit the manifest." Sebastian looked up from the document. "I have decided," he said. "I will submit it. I will testify to its provenance, where it was found, what it contains, and what it means for the original conviction. Fentham will prepare the submission tonight." Verity looked at him. Something in her face shifted, not relief, not gratitude, but a careful and specific attention, the look of a woman recalibrating what she knows about a person. "Thank you," she said. That night, she went looking for him and found him in the nursery. The curtains were open. A lamp burned on the table between the two beds where Eliza and Thomas slept, and Sebastian was sitting on the edge of Thomas's bed with a book of natural history open on his knee, the same book she had seen in the sick room, reading in the halting, unpracticed sentences of a man who has not read aloud to children before and is discovering, mid-sentence, that it requires a different skill than he possesses. Thomas corrected his pronunciation of chrysalis with complete confidence and no ceremony. Eliza, from her own bed, corrected his emphasis on metamorphosis. Sebastian accepted both corrections without embarrassment, tried again, and got it approximately right. Verity stood in the doorway and watched. When both children had finally settled into sleep, Sebastian set the book aside and stood, and found Verity still in the doorway. The lamp made the room warm, and the open curtains showed a clear night sky. "This is the man I will stand beside in court tomorrow," Verity said. Sebastian crossed the room to her. He kissed her once, plainly, without ceremony or preliminary, the way a man kisses a woman when he has stopped pretending that he does not want to. Verity did not step back. She did not move at all for a moment, and then she lifted her hand and placed it flat against his chest and felt his heart beating under her palm. The spring assizes were held in the county town, in a courtroom that had high windows and pale morning light, and the particular atmosphere of a room where things are decided. Roland arrived early and took a position near the front where he could watch both the magistrate's bench and the door. He looked, Verity thought when she entered, like a man who was very certain of the outcome. Grace sat in the gallery with Fentham beside her, her hands folded in her lap, her face composed in the careful way of someone who is managing fear by making themselves very still. Roland's barrister, a Mr. Holt, thin and precise, opened the extortion charge against Verity with measured fluency, detailing the allegation that the Duchess of Cravenmoor had used her husband's name and social position to pressure a witness in a previous criminal matter into making a false statement. He named Grace as a witness to the alleged coercion. He requested that Grace be called to the gallery to testify. Grace rose from her seat. Her hands were unsteady at her sides. Sebastian rose. He rose without being called, without Fentham's prompting, without waiting for the magistrate to acknowledge him. He simply stood up, and the room went quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when a duke stands up in them. "Your Honor," Sebastian said, addressing the magistrate directly, "I have a document relevant to this matter, and I request the court's permission to present it." The magistrate, a gray-haired man named Alderton, who had been managing county assizes for 20 years and had seen most things, looked at Sebastian over his spectacles. "You may proceed, Your Grace." Sebastian produced the manifest. He held it up, turned it so that the magistrate could see it clearly, and began to speak. He identified the document. A shipping manifest, found in a correspondence chest among his late father's papers, dated 2 years before the conviction of Josiah Landon of Thistlewick. He explained its origin. The chest had been in the Cravenmoor estate study since his father's death, unopened until he had occasion to search it recently. He described its contents: a record of a smuggling operation that had run goods through an apothecary's premises in Thistlewick, organized and signed for by a named party. He named Roland Delacourt. He continued without pause, his voice even and carrying in the courtroom's silence. The manifest, he said, showed that the smuggling operation had run through Josiah Landon's shop without Landon's knowledge or consent. That Landon's premises had been used as a transfer point by Roland Delacourt's operation, and that when the operation risked discovery, Roland Delacourt had supplied a falsified ledger to the original magistrate implicating Josiah Landon in the adulteration of medicines, to redirect the investigation away from the smuggling and toward the apothecary. Holt was on his feet. "Your Honor, this is entirely irregular." "Sit down, Mr. Holt," Magistrate Alderton said, without raising his voice. Sebastian set the manifest on the clerk's table. He looked at Roland across the courtroom. "I did not marry a woman who asks for nothing," Sebastian said, and his voice had the quality of something that had been decided long before this room. In a sick room at dawn, and a nursery at night, and a cold solicitor's office in November. "I married a woman who taught me what a man owes the people in his house. Her father is owed his name back. Her sister is owed the right to leave this courtroom without being made to testify against her own family. And this court is owed the evidence it should have had 3 years ago." Roland stood. He said with the composure of a man who is still calculating, "My cousin is speaking from personal loyalty, Your Honor, and this document's provenance." "Mr. Delacourt," Alderton said, "you will be silent." Alderton called a recess. In the corridor outside the courtroom, Grace came to Verity and pressed her face against her sister's shoulder, and Verity held her and said nothing, because there was nothing that needed to be said. Peter, who had come with Fentham and was sitting on a bench near the window, with the focused expression of a child absorbing everything, watched the corridor door. Roland attempted to leave the building during the recess. The county sheriff stopped him at the door. Within the hour, Roland Delacourt was taken into custody on suspicion of fraud and conspiracy. The extortion charge against Verity was suspended pending review of the new evidence. Fentham, who had been waiting for precisely this outcome, began preparing the formal petition for Josiah Landon's pardon before the carriage had left the county town. The pardon came within the week. Fentham arrived at Cravenmoor Hall on a Tuesday morning with the document in a leather folio, signed by the relevant authority, every line of it in order. He presented it to Sebastian in the entrance hall, with the quiet satisfaction of a man who has waited a long time to deliver good news. And Sebastian took it and went to find Verity. She was in the still room, as she generally was in the mornings. The compounding ledger open beside her, and a new preparation set out on the bench. Sebastian came in and set the pardon on the workbench beside the ledger, and Verity looked at it. She picked it up and read it through slowly, from the first line to the last. Sebastian waited. When she set it down, her hand rested on it for a moment, palm flat, as though feeling the weight of the paper. "I have written to the Transportation Authority," Sebastian said, "to request the earliest available return passage for your father." Verity looked at the letter he held out. She looked at it for a long moment, and then she looked at Sebastian, at his face, which was open in a way it had not been in November, in a solicitor's office in the rain, when he had been a man trying to arrange a transaction and she had been a woman with a list. "Thank you," she said. She said it plainly, without ceremony, the word carrying no performance and no cost. It was the first time she had thanked him for something and not felt underneath the word. The old weight of a woman who has learned that men's promises dissolve when they become inconvenient. This one had not dissolved. This one had been kept in front of witnesses at considerable cost, in a courtroom with high windows and pale morning light. She set the pardon down. Then she crossed the still room and stood in front of him, and Sebastian put his arms around her, and she let herself be held. Not graciously, not performatively, but with the specific relief of a woman who has been carrying something alone for a very long time and has finally, after considerable evidence, decided she does not have to. Outside the still room window, the grounds were coming into the first green of spring. The nursery wing's curtains were open along the full length of the east corridor, and somewhere above them, the sound of 4 children arguing about the relative merits of various birds drifted down through the old house like something that had always belonged there. That night, Cravenmoor Hall was quiet in a different way than it had been in November. The nursery door stood open down the corridor, a lamp still burning low inside it. Their own door, at the corridor's other end, was closed. In the morning, on the writing desk outside it, 2 cups sat on a single tray, the tea still warm. Beside them, in Fentham's careful legal hand, Josiah Landon's pardon lay signed and ready, waiting for the man it was written for to come home.